Hi, this is Rock. We're going to look at creating a random data set. First, with doing simple random data, and then with weighted random data. Let's build a data set of randomized motorcycles for sale. I'm going to turn to cycletrader.com for some help. So going over to cycletrader.com, we can see the different makes that are available. If I click on View Makes, let's take the top 10 from this. So I'm going to grab these guys, which are 9 that they say top makes. I'm going to put that over here, paste the values, and then I'm also going to grab another one here, which would be, I guess Ducati would be the next most popular, just a little bit over Husqvarna. So I'm going to grab that, paste that value here. I'm going to sort this. And now I want to extract the actual name without the parenthetical number of those values. So I'll use a text before for that. So if I say text before this, and I use as the delimiter the open parenthesis, close that, then I can bring this down, and then I've got the names. Now, if I want to also get the numbers of how many there are represented in the data set, I can do that by doing a number value of the text before and text after, because essentially I'm getting that number in the middle of these two parentheses. So I'm going to grab this text, have as the delimiter the open parenthesis, close that text after, and then for the text before argument, I'm going to use the close parenthesis, close that, close my number value. Then that gives me a workable number that I can use to do some math with. And if I paste that down, you see how I've been able to pull that out of here. This is the make. I'm going to say equals concatenate make and say name. And then I'm going to concatenate this and say count. So that's the make count. Then what about the categories? If I go back to CycleTrader, I've got some categories of bikes. Look at all these different categories. Let me see if it'll let me grab all these. It does. I'm going to copy that, come back over here, paste those values, hit sort. And what I want is I'm going to copy that, paste that here, but change this to category. So I've got category, category name, category count. Let me grab these, paste those here, bring this down. So this one failed because it's got multiples of the open and ending parenthesis. So if I take that out, that will allow me to do that more naturally. Okay, so now I'm going to do a sum of all this here. I'm going to say sum of this. And then I'm going to copy this and put it here and change this value. Let's go down to here. And then we also want to just go ahead and have a count of these. I'm going to say count A of this, count A of this. Okay, so we've got 10 makes and we've got 32 category names. And we've got a good inclination of how many there are in each type there. Let's do this. I'm going to copy this and have percentages here. The make percentage, and if I make this equal this over the max of this whole thing, then I can turn this into a percentage, and let me give it 1 decimal, paste that down. Oh, I forgot to make that an absolute reference. There we go. Paste that down. Then this should be 1, and it is 100%. All right, let me copy that, put this out here for category percentage. I should be able to copy some of this, but it's going to need some changes. I'm going to paste this here, and this one needs to change to refer to. Yeah, I shouldn't have pegged it on the column. If I had instead made this reference an absolute reference, but only for the rows, like that, if I had done that, then when I copied it and pasted it here, it would have the right reference, except I need to go down to the bottom. There we go. And then I can paste this down. And it's coming up to 40%. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, I just need to change this reference. Okay, so that's 100% now. Let's add in colors. So I'm going to go back again here, view colors. I've got all these colors. If you'll notice, black is by far the most common motorcycle color. Come over here. I'm going to paste those values, sort them. And now I can take this, copy that, paste that here. And instead of category, I'll call it color. And as I copy these, I'm going to copy from here to here, paste that here. It gives me my colors, the count, and the percentages. Okay? So, what are we doing here? What I'm wanting to do is create a randomized list of motorcycles for sale that looks somewhat like the percentages here. But we're going to start with the concept of how to generate just simple random data. The simple random data that I'm talking about here is, let's get a make, category, and color. Up here, I'm going to say quantity, and our quantity, let's have 1,000 here. So if I type sequence and select that, this gives us 1,000. If I go all the way down to the bottom, I've got 1,000 there. Let's generate a random make, random category, and random color that is driven by this quantity. All right, so how are we going to do that? Let's start by putting a number here that we can look up. So I need another column here. I'm going to insert, and I'm going to use this column to say sequence, that's the number of make names. So it gives me 10. If I copy this and put it here, that gives me the number of categories. Unfortunately, I've got the percentage format. Let me take that back to just be a number. No decimal places, thank you. All right, and let me copy that and put that number over here for the colors. Same deal, I don't need the percentage format. So we've got that, we've got that. I'm going to make this have a thick border outside it so that we can easily see where these sections are. All right, so we've got those 3 sections. Let me bring some numbers down here. I'm going to bring this 10 to that. I'm going to bring this 32 there, and I'm going to bring this 12 there. I want to make sure I have at least 3 rows to be able to work with for doing an auto filter here. So let me do an aggregate. All right, so these are going to just be a way to count. Let me set the filter there. All right, so let's do a randomized number here. Here's simple random data. We're going to say rand between 1 and this number 10, okay? Peg that on the row 16. If I enter that and spread that across, I'm going to have random numbers between 1 and 10, 1 and 32, and 1 and 12. And if I click on this over and over, it will randomly regenerate those numbers. You see how the one in the middle tends to be higher? That's because it's randomly going between 1 and 32 instead of between 1 and 10. I won the jackpot there with all 10s across. All right, we're going to use this random number to do a lookup. If we say X lookup this random number in this and return this, then that's going to give me triumph. And if for this one, let's do this, but we'll fix these references. For this one, the reference is going to be this guy, and what it's going to return when it looks up 1 through 32 here is this. So we've got a Yamaha enclosed, and then for this we will change the K to an S, and we will change this selection to these colors here. Make that an absolute reference. So now we have a Triumph motorcycle double that's green. So now every time we hit calculate, it gives us a new set here. We've got a Triumph trike that's green. We've got a Suzuki flatbed that's red. And we can just keep going through and generate a bunch of them. Now, if I wanted to copy this same thing all the way down and have 1,000 of them, but I must have made a mistake with one of my absolute references. So let's just undo that for a second and see which one it is. Let's see. Okay, so it's on I7. I'm going to go ahead and do that absolute reference. On this one, N7 was an absolute reference. On this one, it was not. Let me go ahead and make that an absolute reference. All right, let's try that again. If I take this and I paste that down using Control D, we could do this all the way down to 1,000. But what I want to be able to do is change this number from, say, 1,000 to 500 and have it have 500. If I had copied this down all the way to 1,000, then I would have to go in and delete 500 rows to get back to 500. I want to be able to control the number of randomly generated items from this quantity. So I'm going to delete these for a second and come back up here and fix this so that it will be driven by what I've got here. To do that, I'm going to create a let function. So let me set this aside for a minute and introduce a let function. I'm going to call this a random array that I'm going to create here. And I'm going to use the rand array function to do this. So rand array, and this asks for the number of rows that I want. The number of rows is this quantity. So I'm going to click on that, make it an absolute reference. Number of columns is just going to be 1. The minimum is going to be 1 as well. And the maximum is going to be this number here. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to make the absolute reference just for the row. And then the fact that I want this to be an integer instead of a number that has decimal points, I'm going to say true there. So that's my random array, all right? Then the next thing I'm going to create is my lookup here. And the lookup, where I look this up, is going to be driven by which column I'm in. So it's I7, which is there. So I'm going to pause this by putting an apostrophe in front of it, set this row height to 15. All right. what I want to do is I want to put the reference here for these. So for the make, the reference is, I'm going to say input reference, and the return reference. This is $I, $7 pound. For this one, it's $N, $7 pound. And for this one, it's $S, $7 pound. Now coming back here, I'm going to think ahead and figure out what my return reference is going to be, which it's this. If I say equals and I choose this and make that an absolute reference, I can just take off the equal sign and that gives me that reference. So let's do that again for this. I'm going to choose that absolute reference, take off the equal sign. Now I want to do the same thing for the return for the color name. Make that absolute, take off the equal sign, and we're making some progress because what we're going to do here is come back to this and we're going to define our number is going to be this, and let's peg it on the row. The value that we return is going to be, okay, for the number, I actually wanted to have an indirect of that. And for the value, I want it to be an indirect of that. And we'll peg that on the row. And now I should be able to do an executable here like I like to do with my let functions. And the executable is going to be my random array that I have defined here. That's what I'm going to look up. And then num is where I look it up. And then the return is val. And then all I need to do is tell the let function to execute this, the executable. And if I hit enter, it generates it for the 500 lines that I've got. And now I should be able to copy this to the right, and it generates it for the make, the category, and the color. And we could have chosen any other thing to do about a particular list of motorcycles. We could have had price, we could have had the engine size and CCs, but I'm just using these as examples. And that is how to do simple random data. So if we know how to do simple random data, and it's that simple, why do we need weighted random data? Using autofilter with the randomized data is tricky because once you apply a filter, things change because you're randomizing. So what I want to do here is I'm going to increase my autofilter by taking a snapshot of all this, and I'm going to paste it here as the values, and then I'm going to change my autofilter to reset it to be here. So even though over here my make, category, and color will continue to change and randomize, I've got some over here to work with that are staying stagnant. But then this bottom line will change based on what's filtered. So let's say I'm going to filter for KTM. So KTM is 47 of these out of 500. All right. But if I look at the orange, how many of these are orange? I've only got 3 out of, what was it, 47. 3 out of 47 that are orange. That's 6%. Only 6% are orange. If you go over into the real world and you select for KTM, and then you look to see how many of those are orange, you click on orange as your required down filter. You come up here, and out of 11,212, there are 7,535 that are orange. So if I say 7,535 divided by 11,212, that's 67%. 67% of KTMs are orange out in the wild. And yet in our data, only 6% of KTMs are orange. So our data is going to look strange to have this many blue KTMs, to have this many green KTMs. It's just not going to make any sense. The data suddenly doesn't look realistic. So that's why you need to have weighted random data. And this is going to start to make sense as soon as we put some kind of weighting on this. How do we put a weighting on the randomized data? Let's just do another calculation here quickly. Let's make these percentages, and let me make this, say, this over this. And so now we've got a way to say what percentage are we looking at here. I filtered for KTM, which was 10%. If I filter for, let's say, Kawasaki, that's 7%. If I filter for Harley Davidson, that's 11%. They're all hovering around the same number. Let me take this up to 1,000 because it's easier to see what the percentages should be. Then I'm going to grab these, copy those, and put a fresh set of pasted values there. Okay, now the BMWs out in the wild should be around 5% or so, 4 to 5%. If I select it from our data, we actually have 10%. And the reason we have 10% is there are 10 categories, and we've randomized how often BMW shows up to be basically 1 in 10. So, but if you look at this for any one that we look at, Ducati should be about 3%, and it's 8%, which randomly is close enough to 10%, to be 10%. Harley Davidson, 8%. Honda, 10%. Whereas it should be more like 18% in the wild. So I'm going to clear that, and let's do this. Let's figure out a way to have our own count of what's actually showing up here. I'm going to insert 2 columns here. I'm going to call this our count because it's our count, but it's also the count of the randomized numbers here. And then we also need a R percentage. So as opposed to what's shown to actually exist out on cycletrader.com, its count and its percentage, let's show what our randomized set of data is counting. So we can do that with a count if. So if I say equals count if, and we take this range, oh, when I added these two, I inadvertently broke our formula. So let's fix that first. Before we do the count if, we should do this. Let me show you a quick trick here to make datasets resilient to these kinds of changes. I'm going to insert a row here and give myself something to work with. I'm going to build a sequence here of, let's say, 26 times 2. We'll do the alphabet twice just to make sure we have enough columns. And then from this, we're going to put in the alphabet. And then once we get down to Z, we can say equals A and this. We could say, in quotes, A and this, and then we can just take this down to here and do the Control D to fill down. And what I can do here is I'm going to say equals transpose, and then I'm going to select from C through AZ and hit enter. And that gives me these letters across the top. Okay, now to make this resilient, I can make this K refer to, I can build this with a concatenation. So we can say concatenate or concat. I'm going to say absolute, so $, and then I can click on the K, make that an absolute reference. Then I can put in, or I can put in quotes the $, and then for this 7, I can select this row 7, make that absolute. I can put the colon and the $, in quotes, and then for K, I can select K, make it an absolute reference, put this $, in quotes again, and then instead of 16, I can select the row 16 with an absolute reference. Close that. Now this gives me K7 through K16 again. And then this one, instead of I now, this is J, right? So I need to build this, but also have it be resilient. So to make it resilient, I can do, again, a concat. Put that $, I don't know that I need to do that $, but I'm just doing it. $, and choose this I, make that an absolute reference, do the $, choose 7 with that, put the £, in quotes, and then there we go. So now this becomes resilient because, oh, and it shouldn't have been I, it was supposed to be J. I chose the wrong one, so I'm going to choose J. Make that an absolute reference. Now that, oh, I have not fixed, I said K, but it needs to be L. So change this to an L and change this to an L. There we go. Now I've got it back. And now no matter how I change, see how this says J7 and L, and it's referring to this and this. Well, now if I insert another row, this has changed to K and M. So it doesn't matter. Basically, it becomes resilient to my inserting rows and columns. This is a trick that I like to do if I'm building something and I need things to stay stable. I'll have a list of letters across the top and a list of rows down the side, which make it easier to keep it resilient. So now let's fix these. And now that's back in business. Okay. So that was a bit of a diversion because I inserted these two columns that I want to be able to, but I broke our automated lookup. So now that we're back in business, let's do this count. So I'm going to do a count if, and it's this absolute reference pound if it's equal to this. Close that. So we got 91, which all of this is going to be meaningless unless we compare it to the percentage. That's really what we want to look at. So over here, my percentage for our count is going to be equals this divided by this count here. And when I do that, I'm going to want that to be a percentage. So I'm going to take this, click on percentage, and make them have maybe 1 digit. There we go. And then I'm going to do Control D. Oops, something must not be pegged. There we go. Let's make that an absolute reference. Take that down. So all of this should add up to 100%. Let me paste the values, or paste the formula of that right there. So that should not be 104%. Oh, because the count, let's see, we never looked at to verify what this is. D14 minus 23 is 977. Is that the right? No, I went the wrong direction on this. It needs to be 1022. So it needs to be plus 23. Okay, so let's fix this minus 23 that we see all through here to be plus 23 by doing a Control H, find minus 23, and replace it with a plus 23. There we go. That makes more sense that we've got 1,000 since we said we wanted 1,000. All right, I never did get a good color one here. All right, so over here we have our static data that we've pasted the values of just to test things out with an auto filter. And over here we have the continuously regenerating randomly make, category, and color. All right, so the point I was going to make here was that this, which is now adding up to 100%, is not aligned with what we see in terms of numbers in the wild. That was going to be my point. These hover around the average of 10%, 10.0%, whereas these, even though they average 10%, they, on an individual basis, skew much higher for Harleys and Hondas, and certainly higher for Kawasaki's than for Ducatis and BMWs, of which there are fewer. Okay, so how do we weight these to get these numbers aligned with these? I'm going to go ahead and select both of these and give them this color scale when we can see that these are obviously darker. We want these two columns to look pretty much the same. And how do we do that? Well, we need to weight the percentages that we want to give each of these. I'm going to insert two more columns here. And with this, what I want to do is have a running tally of what these lookup counts can be. We start with 1, so this is the start, and this is the end. And the end of the BMWs, it's going to be this. So out of the 160,000 make counts, 7,118 are BMWs. So for the start for the Ducatis, we can say, we'll take this and we'll add 1. So the Ducatis start on 7,119. And then for this, we're going to say equals this plus this. And now I can copy this down, and we get to 160,037 in a stair-step kind of way. The BMWs take us up through 7,000 something. Ducatis take us from 7 to 12. Harley Davidsons take us from 12,500 something to 42,000. So we can use this information in this start column to modify our lookup. And let me show you what I mean by that. If I come here and I change this random array, instead of using 10 as the maximum in what we have between 1 and 10, a randomization between 1 and 10, we're going to have a randomization between 1 and 160,037. So let me peg that there, and then let's change our input to be from K7 to be from this array. And then for our value, we can keep it at the same. But see how we just switched where we're going to look up? And then when it returns this, which comes back as D18, which is M, let me hit enter. Oh, before I do that, we have to fix this lookup type, because this lookup is a perfect match. It has to find a perfect match, and we're not going to find that. We're going to find things within these ranges from 1 to 7,119, etc. So I'm going to put a match mode of -1, because this -1 tells us if it doesn't find it, go to the next largest thing. If it finds 7,500, it should go to Ducati. If it finds 13,000, it should go to Harley Davidson. So even though it's not finding an exact match, it's falling in with that next match mode. All right, so now if I hit enter, what broke? And so now let's modify the num input to this directly. We don't need the indirect anymore since we are using exactly this selection. And let's give that a try. And now we've got our R percentage is much more closely aligned to real world type values. That is the power of weighted random data versus simple random data. So to review that again, let's do it again, and we'll do just the category and colors as well. What we're doing is we're going to add 4 columns here where we can look at the start and end, our count, and our percentage. So we're going to add those in here. I'm going to select these 4, insert, call this start, end, our count, and percentage. And just like we did for the makes, for category, we're going to have the percentage calculated here. We're going to have the start be 1, and this end is going to be this. So let me just copy this here for a second and see what happens. Actually, let me just copy all this for a second and see what happens. I'm going to copy and paste that. If I paste this all the way down, we got to 195,807, which is what this number is. So let's fix what we've got going on here. So D23, and I think we need to go to E, because that's the column for our category, is E. So if I fix that one here and paste that down, then we've got that. Let me select all this and this and put them on the same scale in the conditional formatting. So we see what these tend toward. We've got more cruisers and dirt bikes, sport bikes, and standard than all these other things. So how do we make these simple randomized ones look more like the real world? Well, we need to have, just like we did over here, just like we did for make, we need to modify the category randomization formula so that we start with, instead of E16, which is 32, we're going to start with 195,807. And then instead of doing this lookup of E17, which is T7 pound, I'm going to grab this start array, make an absolute reference of that, and then we need to modify our X lookup to have a -1 match type. Now as we come over here, our R percentages align much better with real world type values. Let's do that one more time. I'm going to insert 4 columns here. I'm going to grab start, end, and these guys here. Paste that here. And we need to modify this to an F. And I'm going to put these two on the same color scale. And you see they're not. These are distributed to average 8.3 because there's 12 of them. We want these to align more to the in the wild colors, which tend toward black, red, white, even gray and blue are more than many of these, like brown, very unusual. So let's go over here to our color randomizer. Instead of F16 for the highest number to randomize to, we're going to get to the total color count here. And then instead of this AC7, which was this, AC7 pound was this, we are going to refer to this list, do an F4, and then we're also going to update our XLOOKUP to have a -1 exact match or next larger item match type in the XLOOKUP argument. I hit enter there. Now it's randomized in such a way that these are a lot more like what you see out in the wild. So that is create a random data set. It's got simple random data and now weighted random data. We could keep going and make a really nice data set, driving it with the percentages that we see in the wild. I'll leave that up to you. That was create a random data set. Next, we're going to talk about why not to merge cells. See you then.